Yeah, very happy to have back on the show Anne Christine Tedeschi, an award-winning journalist, author, activist, filmmaker, founder and director of Stop the Coup 2025 and Resisting Project 2025. And she's an expert on global HIV, health, and LGBTQ topics as well. Anne Christine, nice to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're most welcome. Glad
You
to
were
be.
on before the nightmare, warning us of what the nightmare was going to be. And here we are. And look, when you look in the big picture here, what are you seeing? I know you're about to stop the coup. Is there a coup unfolding? Is it an embrace of autocracy that you feared would be happening? And what can you share in that regard?
Well, let's just step back. So I came on the show, I think, I'm not sure exactly when it was, but um, the organization that went out with Resisting Project 25, our goal was always to sound the alarm about Project 2025. And so, yes, as I think a lot of listeners you'll say, this is very much what we're seeing under the second Trump administration. We're seeing very much a verbatim implementation of the Project 2025 playbook. But I want to step back and just tell you a little bit how I see things right now,
Sure, of course.
because people are always asking, like, as you say, like, are we under autocracy? Where are we at? What's happening? And so what I would say is that first of all, we're in actually a completely unprecedented chapter, not just in America, but in the world. The kind of coup that we are experiencing under Trump, we haven't ever seen. And it's because it has some features that are like other coups, but it has some new elements.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would say is that the reason that it's unprecedented is because it's what we call a self coup. In other words, Trump was elected. And then he has become, I mean, he started in the first time, but certainly under the second administration now, he has begun to usurp powers from Congress and from the courts, which is kind of the definition of a self coup. It's kind of coming within, right? Um, and as I said, it very much on a policy level, he's implementing a very much a sweeping dismantling of the federal government and things that we saw that were presented and proposed by Project 2025. And it's sort of, reflecting of a far right, Christian nationalist driven radical libertarian agenda. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the
Mm-hmm.
pieces that are important is that there are these elements that are different, and they include, of course, what we've seen, which is the kind of role of an outside group called sort of Doge, the private sector being able to come in and have a very high level role, and also the new and critically important use of artificial intelligence agents, which we have never really seen. And it's
Right.
allowed the Trump administration to move this agenda on at a speed and with a depth that even the people writing Project 25 could not have anticipated. Although there's some evidence that some people were involved. So I want to talk about that. But to me, what I think is that what we are at is there was a political science a lot of people like to quote. And I have my friend Masha Gessen wrote a book about this, but there's a Hungarian political scientist whose name is Balint Magyar, and he kind of studied a lot of these things and said there are kind of three phases to an autocracy, which is an autocracy is like rule by one leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's that you have the first attacks, and then you have something called autocratic breakthrough. And then if the breakthrough really happens, which means that the leader has really taken control of all the major institutions, you'll get to what we're seeing and what we've seen for many years now in Russia and even China and arguably in India, which is really a consolidation of an autocracy, a
Mm-hmm.
mature autocracy. So in the US, we're somewhere between that first and second stage. We have seen the autocratic attack. It's really amplified. And we haven't, in some areas, I would argue we're even seeing the breakthrough in some areas. But we have seen also pushback. And in fact, we're seeing the functioning of our democracy in the sense that many people are mobilizing. We still have a free press, arguably. We still have the courts that are fighting back. And we're seeing that, in other words, all of the major state institutions are not captured. But that
Mm-hmm.
is the goal. So we are in an authoritarian moment. It's certainly an implementation of authoritarianism. And then there's pieces that are novel and are important to consider is that while it's what we call an autocracy, it's also what people correctly call an oligarchy in the sense that you have a small group of people. Trump did not write Project 2025. This has been a plan for a long time, right, by the Christian movement. But there is a small set of people who are actually the ones who are implementing this. Trump's going along, he gets the credit. We've seen some of those names that came up in Project 2025, which was written by, people who are in a lot of this right-wing groups. It was obviously helmed by the Heritage Foundation, But you have a couple of groups that were very important, and those groups are the ones whose members are now the key people in his cabinet. Particularly, we've seen Russell Vogt, who is in charge of the Office of Management and Budget. He wrote a lot of this plan in terms of the takeover of all the little levers of the administration. And you have Stephen Miller, who also, of course, wrote, the immigration plan and is kind of the deputy chief of staff, right? But his role has been very much these folks. He brought in early on, they brought in a lot of lawyers for the past 2 years, since 2022, as they wrote this, to try to figure out how could they do this legally by testing the limits of law, but then also using sometimes obscure laws and other things. And so what Trump has done recently, as we've seen the last 2 months, is he has sought to have and give himself, first of all, he's declared different kinds of emergencies in order to seek wartime powers. He's
Mhm.
done this in the immigration sphere, we've seen with the Alien Enemies Act. He recently did this with tariffs to sort of say, we're in a financial emergency, therefore, I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to take control and I'm going to bypass. So the model is one that's new because we've, in fact, he has used at this point over 150 executive orders, arguably 145, but many other orders. And so he's really not used in any way the legislature, which is what you see in some other coups, right? You see a person try to take power and then you see a fight happening in Congress or not. Here we're really seeing that he has been able to act via executive order, and he has a pliant Congress. He's got a majority in Congress. There's some fightbacks, but really he hasn't even sought to engage them. He has breached power. He has
Mhm.
done many things that we would consider illegal and are being carried out to the point where we are now in a constitutional crisis. The US has been declared to be in a worsening democracy recently by, measures of different
Mhm.
democratic, you know, democratic measures. But he also has the shadow cabinet. And I think it's important for people to, in this next couple, months, to look ahead and say, what is the role being played by these people? They include not just Musk, but a number of Silicon Valley titans who are radical libertarians. You have people like Peter Thiel and others. And why are they so important? They're important because their technology has been used to basically take over the structure of our federal government. So, for example, Peter Thiel owns Palantir. That is this kind of a surveillance technology system. It was already being used by NASA and some of the Department of Defense. Now, what they're doing is they're consolidating all of that so that essentially the data systems that were used by Musk and Thiel are the ones that are running our government. And they have, in a very short period of time, been able to access all of our financial and private information. So the
So,
question is, do they have it all? I would argue
right.
most likely they have it all at this point.
And what's their end game with it?
Data is, it's not just currency, data is power. Data gives you the ability to do a number of things that they're doing right now. So, what does it let you do? It lets you identify and
Mhm.
target the people you want to remove because you don't agree with them. So, that can be all the people in federal government or Biden officials or whatever. It lets you identify and get rid of the people that you want to remove, all the immigration people, all the students now that they feel are, taking positions or critical of their policy in Israel. It also allows them to go after people in programs that have ideas that they don't want. So in many, many different sectors, the main tool that they decided to use, and this was in the Project 2025 playbook, was something called impoundment, where essentially they said, we're just going to withhold money. We're going to withhold money. And our end, well, what's our end game here? Our end game is to show that the federal government doesn't work. It should be smaller. It doesn't work. And that's why we should privatize it. So the big piece that's happening with Doge and this cabinet and this shadow cabinet is privatization. And they've weaponized not just
Yep.
artificial intelligence, but now they're seeking to also use, of course, cryptocurrencies and other currencies that bypass the system, much of it for profit. So I think if you go back to the model, many people have said, we shouldn't look at this as a strict autocracy. Let's look at this more like a mafia state, more like a criminal enterprise. And the reason is because you have a group of people who are beholden to a leader. Well, it's not just Trump, but this is a group of people. The government begins to be run by favors. So they'll make a policy and then they'll start making, exceptions to that. So, by, for example, by saying, all private companies have to implement DEI, He threatens them. He says, we're not going to give you money. He's threatening the private law firms. We won't give you money. And then he'll say, well, if you go ahead and do what we said, we might give you a break. And you're seeing this in all these different areas that are not so talked about. We're seeing this in the builders and the construction industry. We're seeing this in the farmers. They're seeing policies, right, that Trump has implemented, like cutting down on the number of migrant workers or cutting down on the
Mhm.
people who, come and harvest their fields, etc. And then when they complain, they'll say, okay, well, we'll give you a break. We'll give you a waiver. So that's kind of the model of a mafia state.
And I'm chatting with Anne Christine Tedeschi, award-winning journalist. So, and it's so on point about the privatization. I mentioned earlier in the week, Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent talking about the need to, we're going to lay people off from the public sector and then they're going to get jobs in the private sector. And that's where the money is made by the GOP donors, even some Democratic donors, to be honest. But these guys are really working with the Republican donors. Democrats have some big Wall Street people as well who want to profit from it. So, what about when you look at Donald Trump's use of government, from executive orders to even
Yeah.
Brendan Carr from the FCC, he wrote his own Project 2025 book chapter there to target media outlets, those who are critical. Literally today, before we came on, for what it's worth, Trump is yelling about MSNBC, his election interference because they couldn't cover the tariffs the way he wanted. He is getting his demands are so, the minutia there. It's like, I didn't like a segment and I'm going to talk about it. And the problem is, it's not a guy yelling in the wind anymore. It's Brendan Carr at the FCC is going to go do something somewhere, even though they don't.
Why are they doing that? What is it all about? If you step back and you look at the playbook itself, Project 2020, what are they doing? In an autocracy, I particularly like to talk about the Viktor Orban playbook because Viktor
Yes.
Orban is the autocrat in Hungary. And as people know, Project 2020 is very much closely modeled on that. They actually, people who put it together went over to Hungary, they studied with it, they then made a deal with some of the Hungarian think tanks who came over and literally acted as consultants on Project 2025. How can we make a US illiberal state, right? Trump is basically, that's the model. It's a US illiberalism. And Orban's been exporting his model everywhere, talking to lots of different people saying, and in a lot of other countries are thinking about this. Okay. There's three pieces of the Orban recipe book. The first one is you take control of the votes. The second one is you seek to do exactly what's happening now, which is you try to take control of the other institutions, the parliament and the Congress, so that you can then pass your rules, even change the Constitution, which Orban did, and which, of course, the people behind Trump would love to do.
Sure.
And thirdly, you make sure that you control the media and the message. You have to be able to assure that you continually enforce a message. So there's two pieces of it. One is censorship, right? Making sure that the people who are critical of you don't have much air or oxygen to do what they do. The second one is being able to set up a system where you're continually getting your message. So if you look at that now, with the vote, we saw even before the November vote, and there's a lot of people investigating this, so certainly I'm not alone, but we saw that the very people who are now in control of the US government, right, under Trump, which is Peter Thiel and Musk using X and others, they piloted the very AI agents that are now being implemented to take control of our data, to use our data. And why did they do it? Because they were testing out combinations of things, disinformation. They allowed, different groups to come in, Russian groups, Chinese, others, to do a fair amount of messaging that was targeted. We know about that. We've seen a lot of media about that. And Musk himself, came in and had a particular role to play. And there are people who are whistleblowers who worked for Musk, who worked for X, who have gone on record, and you can see this in Substack and other places. It hasn't gotten as much attention as it should, but saying, look, they did things in order to control the vote, in order to do, and we don't exactly know too much about that hacking, but more and more
Right.
will get exposed. But the point is, this is what they're doing now. And so when you look at the immigration attack, why are they so interested in removing 1 million people? Many people will argue it's because it they get much more control over the vote. People who come in, they become citizens, they get a right to vote, and we've seen this historically. So they're playing a longer game. They want to get control of the vote. When you look at the data allows you to attack the vote, and we're seeing enormous amount of attacks all around the country. There aren't being as reported enough, which are attempts to take away votes from the progressive or the Democratic side and increase the vote for the Republican side. And this is important because they have a very clear goal of these midterm elections. They want to make sure that they've already gotten enough stacking of the vote using this data, attacking people, removing people from the rolls. That is the goal of the data in many ways in terms of the vote. So the Orban play is in play. I mean, you even
And
see this for, women who can't maybe going to be able to vote if they don't use their
right,
husband's name.
with the
So
Save Act. Yep.
it's all about the vote.
Look, it's complete. From my view, and I'd love to hear your take on this. This GOP, this version of it, whatever they are, this autocratic movement, they want to re-envision America and really control every aspect of our lives to make it consistent with their worldview. And it's a far right Christian nationalist oligarchic point of view where cruelty is acceptable when needed. And you see it through migrants to their transgender ban, and the list goes on. So, what hasn't been enacted from Project 2025 yet that we should be concerned with now? Because if some have been in, we've covered a lot of DEI, immigration, the attack on the media. What have they not been able to achieve yet, and what should we be watching for?
Okay, well, just before I do, I want to talk about Christian nationalism because it's important for us to say that Trump has, in fact, put in place the key leaders of the New Apostolic Reformation, which is a particular kind of end times Christian nationalist branch, who are his top cabinet people. We're talking about Russell Vogt, Pete Hegseth, Pam Bondi. We're also talking about Paula White Cain, who has actually been given this new Department of Faith. So within that agenda, there is this goal of aligning US government, federal government laws and policies to reflect these particular very conservative Christian principles, but also to change law and reflect the Bible in many cases. So we're starting to see this. We've seen the first EOs, executive orders around, going after any anti-Christian bias.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen all the stuff in the Department of Education. We've seen the amount of money that is going to both Christian associations and Christian churches. We've seen it in, one of the very first reasons why you saw such a consolidation of the Christian conservative movement many, many years back was because they were threatened with the removal of tax exempt status. They didn't want to lose their money. This is how the Christian movement has really gotten so much money and become such a political force. And so we're seeing that now, this kind of giving Christian institutions and groups all these sort of favors. It's written into the law to privilege them to be able to make money. The New Apostolic Reformation is a prosperity gospel. They are about enriching themselves as they advance a certain social and other ideological set of principles. I just want to say that because it's important to know it's being.
No, I think it's important. So, what's next for them? What should we be looking for?
Well, let's just talk about a couple of things that you said, like what didn't happen, and I think that's important. Well, first of all, we did see Schedule F, which we knew would happen. Many things happened there, um, but we haven't seen necessarily the full expression of the anti-abortion agenda. We've seen a lot of it. We saw abortion get attacked. We saw the global gag rule get returned. We saw certain things, the Geneva Convention. We've seen this attempt to harmonize our international treaties to reflect that kind of anti-abortion agenda. But they have not yet, although we should expect it, been able to necessarily apply the Comstock Act, which is an attempt to prevent the use of mifepristone, which is a pill that is sometimes used in abortion, or the mail order of it. They're doing it, you're seeing it at the state level and seeing the stack. We're seeing the rhetoric around it, but it hasn't been attempted as an all-out EO federal policy yet. And we expected it and we didn't see it. So that's interesting.
Okay.
Let's see what else. In some areas of banking, we haven't seen as much as we expected. We did see the tariffs, which were essentially, Project 2020 was written by Peter Navarro. There's a lot of his fingerprints in there. And that's why Trump has defended it. It's a Project 2025 vision. But there were pieces of it that we haven't seen. So we did see that Russell Vogt has been put in charge of all our money. In other words, he's in charge of the Consumer Federal Protection Board, right? It's amazing that he's in charge of this, but there are certain pieces of it that we haven't seen happen yet. While Trump is, for example, he wanted to be able to take charge of the Department of Commerce, the Federal Reserve, we see that there was pushback. So in fact, Jerome Powell is still there.
Mhm.
He has pushed back. So, in some areas, it's not a full model there.
And the courts as well. The courts have slowed down. They've been speed bumps and maybe brick walls. We'll find out in time.
Right. Well, I think what's important is that we're going to see, we are at the test case for our Constitution right now. We're in a constitutional crisis, meaning that these first test cases are coming up this month, right? With the tariffs, we have the Alien Enemies Act. As we know, that has been ruled illegal, but it's being pushed. So
Yeah.
it's a desire to be able to have and use these bogus emergencies in order to consolidate power. And so, it's going to be very important to see whether or not the Congress, or the Supreme Court rather, decides that it wants to defend its own powers, right? We're at the point where it's going to be interesting to see this. We have seen a pushback, even on the tariffs, we
Mhm.
saw some pushback. But we also saw some very negative rules. You brought up the transgender decision of the Supreme Court, where now we have seen that there was this initial break put on it, and then it got to that level, and now we're seeing this. And I think what we expect to see ahead, and we should fully expect this because it's in Project 2025, and it is the overall goal, which is they will seek to attack many of the other gains of the LGBTQ movement. So we should expect the attack on gay marriage. We should expect attacks on adoption, more attacks on adoption, all of the stuff that's in the playbook. I mean, they've already said by executive order, there's no gender, there's only sex, there's male, there's female, there's nothing in between. In fact, they've even made the word woman or women a banned word, as many of the banned words. So you can see where this is going. This is a very anti-woman attack. It's also trying to roll back many of the gains that are within this progressive movement. And it's really many of the gains that also impact, heterosexual people. It impacts people who are, maybe single,
Mhm.
in all those areas. It's all within this. It's a very much the combination of the social agenda of Project 2025 and this Christian nationalist movement, but it's also very much seeking to reimpose the level of control that men in particular have in government by putting it into the level of government. I think the other thing that I really want to talk about that I think is not being talked about in the right way
Mhm.
is that we've seen tons and tons of stories and everything about DEI, right? We see less about DEIA, which is the last part, which is disabled people, which have been very attacked also.
Mhm.
But DEI is just a code word for racism. And we're seeing it, and it's important to talk about it because it's not just about trying to stop maybe what is seen as a redress of inequalities in government by removing civil rights agencies, by removing the levers of power, allowing people to be able to, reverse or go after or maybe argue a claim of discrimination, but it's doing something much more important. If you remove, the stories of what happened to people, if you remove the achievements of black astronauts or black soldiers or what people did in history, and you change that, you're essentially rewriting the story of America. You are writing it for the past. So this attack is aimed at the past of America as well as the present and the future. And it's important to see that because this is also a feature of autocracy. If you can't teach your history and you suddenly have a different story and a different set of facts that you're constantly referring to as you write new laws, you're going to end up with a different future based on a false history. So we are
And
advancing what Project 2025 wanted to call a post-racial story. But really what we're doing is we're seeking to kind of rewrite the story and pick it up from Reconstruction. It is a
I think it's right.
savage attack.
I think it's such an
Savage attack.
important point. I mean, is in 1984 by George Orwell, whoever controls the past controls the future. That line, and it goes through. The last time we get only a couple minutes left, and it's been really fast. It's great chatting with you. What is working to stop Trump? You email me about
Yeah.
this, and I want people to know in our last 2 minutes what is working. What should we be doing more of as we go forward through this?
The biggest and most important thing is that an autocrat wants to control the story and show that that they have sovereign power and they're impenetrable. They want people to be afraid.
Mhm.
And right now, what we're seeing is that we are winning in the court of popular opinion. Very important. We're seeing a massive mobilization. People are saying no. And the more that people show that they are willing to defy in a million ways, that is constantly cracking at that veneer, right? and the courts are providing some breaks around people's protection. So that is the most important thing. In the court of public opinion, which the polls show it, I mean, even among independents, I think Trump just got an F this week, right?
Yeah, he did.
61% of people are opposed to his economic policies. He has overreached. He's hurting Americans in their pocketbooks and people who were not political. He has just radicalized a generation of Americans that weren't thinking about politics in this way. So he has done the progressive movement a tremendous favor. He's given us a lot of targets in that way for how we need to organize. What's important in this moment of autocracy is what you do about the attacks. It's important to focus on what Trump is doing. It's more important to focus on how are we mobilizing in the area of talking about civics and talking about what democratic structures we need to see in mobilizing at these different levels. It's going to be important to see how we organize, but that's very important. The courts are doing a lot. We need to support the courts. And very much at a state level, I think we have a lot of rights. And if we look to the elections that are coming up, right,
Mhm.
at the state level, in November 2024, we had a lot of progressives that won. We also had moderate Republicans that won. So we actually have a lot of people who will be in a position to defend us at the midterm elections. We have an enormous amount of work to do to focus on the elections, to organize around the elections with the vote. And we also have to be showing up in the streets with very clear, messages that we have. We do not accept the stealing of our financial information. Theft is going on. We need to call out the corruption. We need to bring facts to the corruption. We need our media to be doing that work. We need to protect the media. We need to tell law schools and universities to say, yes, you need to take a pledge of resistance. Everyone should be taking a pledge of resistance. We need to do this right now for our armed forces and our FBI and et cetera,
Right.
because we need to say to people, we have our eyes on you. It is not going to be acceptable for you to do illegal things in the name of an autocrat.
I agree. And Christine Tedeschi, it's great chatting. If people want to check out your Substack, which I read your Substack, where can they go? Tell us.
So the Substack is Resisting Project 2025. That's the
Mhm.
name of it. Comes out bi-weekly. We also have a campaign, which is the continuation of what we did in 2024. It's called resistingproject2025.org. And we have a lot of information we put up there. We're doing two things. We're tracking the resistance. We're focused on what is working. And we're
Mhm.
also going to continually tell you where you are in this implementation of Project 2025.
That's great. I look forward to chat with you more often. Update us what's going on. You're doing great work. Thanks so much. Have a great
You're
weekend, my friend.
welcome. Thank you so much.